Hello everybody, welcome to the 19th Xamarin Android tutorial. And this will be continuation of the 18th tutorial in which we set up our contact. Okay, so we have our fragment that comes in and we simply make a contact. And then we now have the ability to open up our gallery and we scale down this image to a thumbnail so that we're using memory efficiently. Okay, so that's where we are now. Now in this tutorial, what we're going to be looking at is actually sending this contact to the server, okay, on creation. So as soon as we create it, we're going to send out to our server to save in our database using a web request. Okay, so let's get started on that. Now, the project file, the start, if you look on the link below, you'll have a file that you can download and it'll look just like this. So it'll act as a template, as a starting point for what we're going to do in this tutorial. Okay, guys? So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go to our dialog, and this is what comes up when we actually hit the add button. So this is the class that takes care of that. So this is where you actually input the number and the name and create contact, okay? And here is the button where you actually click and create the contact, okay? So this is going to be the majority of the code that we're going to put in here, okay? So inside of here, we're going to want to actually do our web request, all right? So the first thing that we're going to want to do is use a web client, okay? So let's go ahead and make our web client, all right? So use web client. And this is basically a subclass of our request. And so the web client in .NET has a few more goodies and just kind of lets you do a little more things than the web request does, but everything the web request does and the web client can do a little more. So using the web client I like to use, it's very simple and straightforward. So let's go ahead and instantiate a new instance of it. All right, we'll need to import that system.net. All right, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a URI. Okay, so where is this file, where is this client going to? Okay, so we're actually going to use PHP to talk to our server. Okay, so we'll get into that shortly. And this is just the IP address on my local area network for the server that I'm talking to. Okay, so this could be the local host, this could be your own, this could be, you know, a server that you communicate with, and you just have, all you need to do is put this file on that server. Okay, so once again, this could be, you know, your own computer. For me, it's not, it's actually another computer on my network. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to that. That's the one that has my SQL Server and my PHP on that server. That's where I do a lot of my networking at. Okay, so but once again, this could be something else. All right, so this is going to be your own IP address. Alrighty, so let's go over to create contact. Before we go any further in C#, let's go ahead and go to this PHP file. All right, and here it is. Okay, so let me just have it already written out, but I'm going to go over it just really quick to go ahead and make sure that we're all on the same page of what's going on. Some of you guys might be familiar with PHP, some of you guys may not be, so I'm just going to do over it really quick and just make sure we're all on the same page there. So first, we want to make sure that we're going to send some post variables. Okay, we're going to send it the name that we make, the name of the contact, and we're going to send the number. Okay, so these are going to be some post variables that we're going to send. All right, and we're going to basically take them and put them into our own PHP variables using this. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that these are actually set. Okay, so if you go to straight to the URL, basically, if you go, just open this up. If you go to 192.168, and then you go to create contact, nothing's going to happen because it's there, but essentially these post variables never get set, so nothing ever happens. Okay, So that's all we're doing here, so that we can only get to them if you actually specify the variables, all right? So once again, we get them into our PHP variables, and then we use connection info, okay? And this is where we include it from, all right? And connection info is important. That's what actually makes your connection to your server, okay? So I have that into a separate file. So you're going to want to download both these files, and I'll make sure that I have a link that you can get to them. And you want to put your server name, which right now the PHP is the server and PHP are going to be on the same server, so I can use localhost. All right, and then you're going to want to put your database name, which mine's called just test, and then make sure you put your username and your password. Okay, so fill in this stuff before anything, and then this way you can authenticate yourself with your server and get into it and make the connection. Okay, and that's all that's doing. Next, the thing we want to do is we're going to want to check to make sure that we made the connection. If not, we're going to echo out to the client that, hey, I can't connect. Otherwise, we can connect, and we're actually going to query. So we're just going to do a simple query where we insert into our contacts table the name and the number, okay? And then the values are going to be, there are going to be two values, name and number. And we use parameters. We use an array, basically that takes the name and the number, and that wires up and hooks it to these guys right here, okay? And this is using SQL Server. I'm using SQL Server's basically API. So this is Microsoft's plugin for PHP to communicate with Microsoft SQL Server, okay? This isn't PDO, this is their own. So just make sure that you guys can do, if you guys are using PDO or you're using MySQL, there's going to be a little different syntax, but essentially the query and the way you hook up parameters is going to be a little different, but it's going to be the same way you do it there, okay? So, but just wanted to make sure that you guys are on the same page that I'm using SQL Server for the plugin to communicate with my SQL Server, okay? So we want to make a statement. We execute the query. Here's where we actually execute it, and then we check to make sure that everything's okay. If it's not, it'll query out that it failed. Otherwise, it'll come into here, and this is important. It'll do another query, and what it does is actually gets the ID that was just created, okay? So we created a contact here, and we basically take it and we say, hey, what was the ID of that new ID or the ID of the new contact, okay? And we make another statement. We just reinitialize it, and then we get the new ID, okay? So we specify that here, and I just make it as new ID, and we get the ID of the new contact, okay? And we echo that back to the client, okay? So in this case, the mobile phone, all right? And I'll show you why we do that in a second, but just remember that we do get back the ID from SQL Server, okay? So that's what this script right here does for us, okay? So let's go ahead and go into our SQL Server database, okay? And this is my test database, and I'll open up the contacts table. All right, and you can see that there's one contact in it. All right, just some test stuff. And that's basically it. Okay, we don't have an image yet. We're not going to be focusing on images. We're going to do that in the next tutorial because it's going to probably take a whole tutorial to kind of explain. It's a little different for images. So we will be doing images in the next tutorial. But right now, we're just going to do something simple to start off with, just some string data, okay? So so here's basically just 4 columns, name, image, number, and the ID number that's passed back when we create a new contact, okay? So that's all this is right here. Pretty simple and straightforward. All right, so just make sure that you get that PHP file, these 2 files, and put this inside of wherever your server is running. I'm running Apache on my server, so I just put this in the root document, and just make sure that these are in the same directory, okay? And if they're not in the same directory, just make sure you specify that here, directory connection info, okay? So mine are both in the root file, okay, just to make it simple. All right, so now we can come back to our C# code, all right? So the next thing we're gonna wanna do here is we're going to want to create a name value collection, all right? And this is really, really nice. This makes it really simple, okay? So we'll need to import that, and I'll show you why here in a second. All right, so now all we need to do to add our parameters, our post variables, is do parameters.add, and we're going to use this second method that takes a name and a value. So it's basically a key value pair, okay? And remember, right here in our post variables, this is going to be the key, and we're going to give it a value, and then this is going to be another key, and we're going to give it another value, okay? So we've got to make sure that these strings match exactly the same as we do in our C# code. All right, so we want to make sure that that's matching exactly. Okay, so we'll do name, make sure that it matches, and then our value, which is going to be from what we get over here. So txt is just an edit text that we actually enter in. So that's going to be the text the user enters in, okay, at that point in time. All right, so we want to just do that again for the number. All right, now that we have that, we have our two parameters, so that's going to be all we need there. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to subscribe to an event, okay? And this event is called upload values completed, okay? And we'll do that right over here. And this guy gets called essentially when basically the task is done, okay? So it's communicate with the server and it's got something back, okay? So when the whole web request is finished, this will fire, okay? And then we can execute some code afterwards, all right? Because we will be doing this on a separate thread, okay? And that's what we'll do here. So what we're going to do is we're going to want to do client dot upload values async, all right? And it takes a URI, which we've specified, and it takes a name value collection, which are just our parameters, okay? So there you have it. This is actually going to execute our web request on another thread, okay? And then when it's finished, it's going to come down here and do any kind of cleanup code, all right? So in that case, what we're going to do is we're actually going to move this code over to here, all right? And the reason why we're doing that is because we want this to do its own thing and do its web request. And then over here, once it's actually finished, is when we actually want to broadcast to our subscriber, which is over here in the main activity. Remember down here? So this gets called because we subscribe to it here. All right, and then this method gets called, and this basically is just meant to update the UI, okay? So this isn't doing no web requesting, it's just gonna update the UI and actually add the contact in our list view, okay? So let's go back over here. So that's gonna do it here, because if not, it would do it right away, and then it wouldn't really make sense because, hey, what if there's an error? What if there was, what if we're updating the UI and there may have been an error or something like that? So we wanna first make sure that everything is completed first, okay? Which brings us to our next thing. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually get the ID that's returned. Okay, remember back over here, we return the ID, okay, the new contact ID. All right, so this is where we actually retrieve it. All right, so we want to do encoding UTF-8. We want to do get string, okay, and the get string method takes a byte array. All right. And that is exactly the data type of our result is a byte array, okay? So this takes a byte array and converts it into a string, all right? And that's our ID number, all right? And our ID is gonna be an integer, so let's make an integer, all right? And then we'll do int.tryparse, which is a really nice method. It takes it and will return false if it can't parse it or cast it to an integer, all right? So we're not gonna check for false, but if you wanted to, then you can do that, and it's really nice. So now our new ID will take the value of the string ID, okay? And now that's all that's doing there, all right? So the next thing we want to do is we're going to want to actually add a ID number to our contact, okay? So remember over here in our contact class, we just have a name, number, and image. So this represents a single contact, all right? So then what we want to do is we actually want to add the ID. So that way we can keep track when we actually, if we're going to update, which is going to be the next tutorial, we're actually going to update a contact, we're going to need to update by ID. So when you update contact number, blah, blah, where contact ID equals 1. So we're going to want to make sure that we have the ID registered so we know which one to actually update when it comes time to do that, okay? So we'll call it ID. Oops. It's going to be of integer type, so ID. All right, and that's all we need to do there. Now we need to come back into our event args, okay? And remember, our event args are just what's passed into our event, okay? That's broadcast, okay? So right now we have the name and the text, okay? So in our create contact event args, it takes a string, name, and a number, okay? So we want to actually take the ID now, okay? So that's all we're going to do right here. We're going to add again. We want you to take an ID as well. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and specify that here. ID equals ID. All right, so that's all updated, good to go. Now we should get an error here because we've added another parameter to this constructor, which is fine. What we're going to do is we're just going to pass it new ID. All right, so that makes it happy. All right. And the next thing we're going to want to do is this is going to remember update our UI, and this our UI is going to go ahead and update the UI and actually create the contact, okay, in memory. All right, and that's what we want to do here. So when we do new contact, now in our event args we now have an ID number. See that? So we're going to want to add that to our contact. Remember, and we just added the ID. So we're actually going to initialize it. If we don't do this, then the ID is just going to be like null, or it's not going to be null. It's just going to be just this maybe like 0 or something like that. So it's not going to work, and we're not going to be able to keep track of IDs correctly. Okay, so let's go back here, and we'll simply just ID equals e.id. Okay, and that will take care of that. All right, so that way every item in our list view will actually have an ID number. So if we update it, we can just call upon the ID and take that to our web request and feed that in, okay, as a parameter, which we're going to do in the next tutorial. Okay, so let's go back into our dialog. All right, and let's go ahead and make sure that's good. All right, so that should all be good, okay? And we're going to run this, and we're actually probably going to get an error, but I want you guys to see the error, and we'll fix it, and that way, if you guys run into some sort of error, you may know how to fix it and be more prepared for that, okay? So let's go ahead and see what happens when we run this, and we'll see what happens, okay? Let's bring this up. Okay, so let's make a contact, and we'll call it test contact. Just give it some bogus number. Okay, so argument cannot be null. Parameter name bytes. All right, so more than likely what's going on is it's kind of weird when you don't run on the UI thread. What's going to happen is it's going to start causing some weird things, like this method gets called twice, and I'm not sure why, but I was banging my head on it like a while back, and I'm like, why is this getting called? What? I don't get it, you know? And it was because I wasn't running on the UI thread, and the upload values complete or any kind of method that's called after a thread's finished, a separate thread, not the main thread. I always try to make sure that I'm doing a run on UI thread because I start getting some really weird errors, okay? So just wanted to show you guys this. If you guys do get something like this ever in the future, more than likely just try running on UI thread, and that hopefully fixes it, okay? So let's go ahead and fix this problem right now. All right, so the way we do that is we can't just do run on UI thread because we have a fragment, okay, not a activity, okay? But what we can do is we can actually get a reference to the activity and then call upon its run on UI thread method, okay? And we're just gonna do it here in line. Okay, so this is gonna be our action. That's some syntax for it. And then anything in here, and these curly braces will actually run on the UI thread, okay? Well, so we're just gonna put everything in here. Okay, and everything's the same. It's just has to be running on the UI thread, and that's just a safe way to do things. And at this point, we want it to. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it again, and let's see what's happening now. right, make a contact, call it test again. Once again, just give it whatever kind of number. Okay, so no errors or anything. Let's go back into our database and we'll make sure that it, yeah, so it right here inserted, and our test contact inserted too, but we got an error on the client. Not, it did go through in the PHP, so that's good. But here is the full correct way to do it. Okay, so this made sure that it's got in, and now it's going into here, and everything's good. Okay, the last thing we want to do, if you want to do it, is we want to add some kind of feedback to the user, and that's just a progress bar. Okay, so remember our layout file for an actual dialog is right here in our dialog sign up. Here it is. And then do remember that we do have a progress bar right here, okay? And our ID for it, if you don't remember, is just progress bar. Yeah. Okay? So the way we want to do that is we want to, probably know by now, we just want to grab an instance of the progress bar. Call it progress bar. M progress bar, view, find view by ID. Okay, so now we have a reference of it, and now it's actually invisible by default. Okay, so when a user clicks on this create contact, we're going to start the web request. Okay, so at this point, it's safe to basically go ahead and change this visibility to visible. Okay, and we can do that here. All right, and then now over here, we don't really have to set it to invisible, back to invisible, because it's going to dismiss it, and then it's going to go away anyway. All right, but if you did want to, it's safe to do it. Just make sure that you're doing it, any kind of UI updating, you want to make sure that you're doing the UI thread. Okay, and so we'll change this visibility back to invisible. All right. And there you have it. So let's go ahead and try that one more time to make sure that our progress bar is showing up and going away as it should. This is a good way to just provide some feedback for the user to make sure that, like, you know, if it does take a long time, they might think, hey, it's frozen, you know, my application's breaking. It's, you know, it might just be taking a long time because they might not be able to reach a server efficiently. Okay, so call it test progress. All right. Cool. All right. So the progress bar was there, and then it went away. It was actually really fast, but it was there, and then now it went away. Okay. So all is good there, and we are good to go. Okay. So notice one more thing is, obviously it's pretty obvious that as we exit out of this application, our test progress or any other application or any other contact that we made disappears, and that's because right now it's just in memory. Okay. So in the next actually 2 tutorials after this one, so not next one, the one before, we're actually going to be grabbing the data. So we're not going to be inserting, we're not going to be updating data. We're actually going to be selecting data from our database and feeding it into a list view dynamically. Okay, and that way anything we create goes into the server and then comes back, and then we can feed back into it, and then I'll have all of our contacts that we created from the server, and then we'll have, like, you know, any images that we did create. It'll save all that on the server. Okay, because, you know, more than likely that's the way it's going to happen in the real world, is you're going to want to save stuff on the server, and anything here is just going to be stuff in memory for the time being, and then when it dies and you open up the app again, it's just going to reach out to the server again, load up the contacts, and feed them all here. Okay, so we're going to do that in the next couple tutorials. In the next tutorial following this one, we're actually going to be able to take this, set an image, and actually that's going to do an update to the server to update this progress bar with the ID number to save the image, so that way when we select from it, it'll save the image as well. Okay, so there you have it, guys. There is the web request, and if you guys have any questions about, like, the PHP or anything like that, or the library I use, or just any kind of questions, feel free to put some comments below, and I'll be more than happy to answer and do my best to get you guys up and running. All right, thanks for watching, guys.